We'll call the meeting of Monday, November 25th to order. Roll call. Darla.
Yep.
Scott.
Here.
Beauregard.
Here.
Kramer. Grams. Here. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First up on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? There's a motion, is there a second?
Support.
Motion and support, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. And that brings us to the guest citizens forum. Is there anyone who has anything that's not on the agenda you'd like to discuss? Hearing none, we'll go to reports from staff and the administrator Lavender.
All right, so we did have our initial meeting with the East Range Water Board. Jake and Jake were there. We will continue to meet with them, as I stated, the second meeting, we're working through the holidays, so. The Aurora has requested engineering to upsize the water main on Highway 100, the St. Louis County roadway project. I do believe that they're doing both, the standard size they need and the upsize, and so we'll get a price difference there, which White Lakes may be responsible for. If you chose to put that on the ground. The East Range Water Board is also engaged with an engineer to get cost estimates from mains to Aurora and Milwaukee. And so that's basically from Aurora to each community, what exactly that would look like, what kind of infrastructure we're wanting to be putting in the ground, and that's all I have.
Is Water still interested in joining that?
Maybe in 20 years, but not currently.
Did they get a big revamp of the water plant?
They did.
Right, Public Utilities Director Barrett.
Not a lot this time around. Big issue we had last week is lift station 3 went down. They have an old rock system on the back. It's an electrical system that's outdated. We're replacing that with VFDs, so that should be up and running next week sometime. So we're just kind of watching it right now. If it does go down, we get the back truck out there and help it out. Aside from that, just focusing on winter activities. So
Here,
that's it.
all right, thank you. City Attorney, what do we have going?
No report. No report.
All right, reports from elected officials, Counselor Kramer,
Nothing.
Counselor Beauregard,
Nothing tonight, Mayor?
Counselor Scott,
Nothing, Mayor.
Counselor Jarvis.
I have nothing tonight.
And I have nothing to report tonight either. So we'll move on to old business, 10.1, ordinance regarding zoning for R4. The planning trailer park.
Yep, planning commission did meet, they put in a few suggestions to me, I requested that they submit any other suggestions to me, and I will have a draft ordinance in front of them at their January meeting.
Ten two ordinance regarding dangerous dogs, and I've been working with Aurora.
Yep, and we are still waiting on that, so please come to the meeting tonight.
All right, keep that on our agenda. 3 ordinance regarding prohibited animals.
The planning commission met and discussed this ordinance. They did vote unanimously to recommend to not allow backyard chickens in the community. They did state that it would be administratively heavy for the employees and the current staff. They also weren't in favor of the potential of different types of animals and allowing the slippery slope in this situation, so.
I know a couple of the things I heard talk about is, like the chicken coops, are those a permanent structure, are those a temporary structure, are those need a building permit, I know some of those kind of questions had come up. So that would be work on the zoning officer and stuff to regulate that.
I guess on my end, I'd like some more, I guess, recommendations or suggestions from them to see what they would want to make them more inclined to maybe agree with this or. Start to, like allowing dogs and things like that. I think if you could say that, well, any ordinance or law, like, there's obviously some sort of line in the sand where that stops being an issue. If you say just chickens, that's just chickens.
As far as the additional work, I mean, we're trying to make it so just about anybody can have them if they want them, but that how many people are actually interested in it? Is it 10 people in town? Is that much work? I don't know. But yeah, if everybody decides to have one, they'll be inspected, if they all.
And then you have loose chickens instead of just loose dogs.
Yeah.
We already have those sometimes.
And when I did talk to the animal control officer, his initial response was he doesn't care one way or the other, but that is ultimately who would be responsible for collecting and doing something with any loose chickens that he has. I guess I wouldn't mind, talking to them a little more, maybe if we, a couple of us went to a meeting and asked some questions, if there was a size limit on the coops, would they not have to have a zoning permit? Would they not have to apply to have one? Is there, just answer some more of the questions, and like Brennan said, just kind of see what regulations they might allow to make them a little more pro to the situation.
With the administrative stuff, like just prioritizing things like you need to do obviously, and then once you get around to it, then you do whatever. The getting your needs done, and then you get what your needs done in a day, and then you get one process, one day, that's.
Yeah, everyone thinks that their one thing is the one thing, and so we get a lot of phone calls to
Sure.
say, it's just this you have to process. Well, we have 2,000 people of just this.
Yeah.
So it makes it difficult to get everything done, and there is an understanding to prioritizing work, but understanding also that that means some work won't get done, and you'll receive complaints about that.
And I wouldn't wanna make an ordinance to allow them, if it's not something we're going to be able to stay on top of and make sure they're following the regulations. We don't wanna make the time and effort to do all this, and then no one is bothering to check on them or enforce it. It seems to defeat the whole purpose of all this work to make it, allowable. I don't wanna put it on every agenda, but maybe we can find out what some of their recommendations would be that they would allow, or they would lean towards, and then if we just can't come to any common ground, I would wanna go against their recommendation when they're the ones who are gonna have to enforce it.
Yeah, they did talk about it at length. I can definitely bring it up at the next meeting. But they did talk about it at length and what exactly the enforcement would look like. And that is the conclusion they did.
Would there be a light involved, cause we ended up having old truck toppers out in the backyard.
And you have smell issues, you have a lot of issues.
I mean, so are we willing to take on the expense of having the light officer, the animal control officer, and maybe the police involved?
And zoning to
Extra.
allow these, it's a
Yeah.
lot of, different groups that are involved.
Well, did they discuss it all, maybe limiting the areas? I know we want them to make it so anybody could, but if they were on a back lot of woods or Viking Drive or whatever, those areas where they have more space. the bigger lots,
Increasing the acreage that you needed or something.
Then what would their thoughts be on that? If we limited it to just those.
You could reduce the number of elements, from everyone to a handful.
Yeah.
Could we get just maybe like a little brief recap of what their issues that why they're against it, and then if we have questions, we can take it to them one more time and see what the answers are. All right, so we're on to new business, 11.1, Bolton and Meg proposal regarding water supply engineering.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to see everybody made it here with the snow, so So Becky gave me a call this last week and mentioned that the proposal had come up and there's some questions, so if you just kind of bear with me, I'll walk through what the proposal presents, and then if you have any questions or would like to discuss it further, I'd be happy to answer some questions. And another comment that kind of came up was the rates, like a rate study, and so I do have some information that I can talk through after I walk through the proposal about maybe what that looks like and some of our initial thoughts on the concept of a rate study. So the proposal that's presented in front of you takes a three-phase approach to walk through a groundwater assessment in this region, targeting the basically the sixth option in the water study, which looks at a new groundwater supply source. We do have some items in the proposal that talk about regionalization with the East Range Water Board. But I wanted to present tonight that in discussion with the East Range Water Board, those items and those costs for Bolton and Mink to work on those are being covered under the East Range Water Board. And even though the activities are listed in the proposal, there's no cost associated to the City of White Lakes to do those. So when you see a option to East Range Water Board work activity, again, that's being handled separately. So what we recommend for phase one of the work, if you turn to the second page of the proposal, is an alternatives preliminary engineering assessment. So what this takes into for the phase one piece of the groundwater study is basically doing a preliminary investigation with your staff and record search to see if there's any other studies that were previously completed in, like, say, the last 20 to 40 years. Jake has provided a couple studies that we have heard that have been done, so we'll be looking at these studies specifically to see what their findings are, and then working with the city on identifying available land that has land access control to get to. Because ultimately, if we can't get to the well location, it doesn't prove very fruitful. So that would be that first piece. And each phase of the proposal, as we step through them, takes a pause and then offers basically a new scoping and feeing. So that way, for this first phase, we're recommending it to be $8,000. The next phase would be X number of dollars and so forth, so that you don't have to step through all the phases in case you decide early on you would like to no longer proceed with the study. So that's, I forgot to mention, that's why we kind of designed a phase study to it. So again, this first piece would be about $8,000, and we agreed roughly about 2 to 3 weeks to complete this study. Again, the submittals would be a map showing land control, and we eventually would use this information to take a step into the groundwater aquifer desktop evaluation. So the next phase of the project, once it's approved, would be to do a desktop hydrologic evaluation of this local area. We would be teaming with Bar Engineering to complete this. And the reason for this is Bar has done a lot of work in this area between industry and other cities in the area, to where they already have models established and a good understanding of the geology and hydrogeology. So there's a cost saving there in using them and working with them to help assist with the work. So this phase will consist of a desktop analysis of the surrounding area. We'll identify potential future well sites by using the information from the first phase. A summary report and technical memorandum with the findings will be presented. This will include information on soil types to groundwater chemistry that's available, that's published, along with any other sort of online and available information we have, whether that's through MinGeo, MinDNR, or other sources that are published. This piece will also include a technical committee review. So we'll sit down with the city in a technical meeting and discuss the findings. If there's any questions, we'll bring them back to the team and address those questions. And lastly, then this would include attend a regular council meeting to present the findings to the council. So like I said, so the summary items that we'll have from that, we'll have the report or technical memorandum along with a map showing potential areas for wells. That is estimated to be $30,000, and we're anticipating that to take 2 to 3 months to complete, with a milestone being January 27th. If the council decides to proceed with the next phase, this is where we'll get into the groundwater aquifer in-field evaluation and testing. So this is actual installation of wells, along with conducting pump tests and water quality analysis. So what this would entail is preparation of a bid package to solicit test wells. We'll have installation of wells by a certified well installer. The number is ultimately of the number of wells to be installed is going to be dependent on the desktop analysis. So we'll need to work through that to kind of identify how many areas we want to target. And then we'll have conversation with the council on how many they've actually, of the areas identified, how many of those areas you would want to test. So some of the inputs or some of the outputs we look from the modeling and from the efforts of the testing would be groundwater supply rates and then water quality. We can use this information to refine our cost evaluations that were put together in the water study. And then eventually, we would like to sit down with the technical committee for the fourth meeting to review the findings. And once again, if there's any changes, bring it back to the design team and then propose, any additional, provide any additional information that's needed. To complete this test phase, this is a little bit difficult, based off, you know, what we want to provide you is like a number of wells per dollar, just so we can understand, how much it's gonna cost per test well. And on average, with a well installer and then the work that be required, we'd be looking at about 100,000 per well. And again, we have to determine how many, are required. Estimated timeline to complete phase 3, we're assuming it's gonna take from January 27th to about mid-July, August to get all that information. And again, that includes, initial assessments to sourcing a well installer, testing the wells, providing a technical report that provides a summary, and then discussing further actions with the council. So in the proposal is the project schedule for your review. And again, this proposal piece is for phase 1. So that is $8,000 to complete the initial assessments and do some data gather, background information that the city has, and then moving down the road. Does anybody have any questions on the proposal at this point?
Jake, we had previously had some wells in town that were abandoned.
The only wells I'm aware of in town is, it looks like this must have been back in the 90s when you guys drilled wells out by Whitewater. So as you head down to the campground, you got the road curves sharp, and you got that road that kind of shoots off into the woods. We look to be about down that way.
Okay. Was there any data pulled from that or?
If I remember from the reports, I turned those into Bolton Mank, but there still was some manganese in there. Not as high as we're getting out of Colby, obviously, but they did do some lab studies in there.
How do residential wells work? Do they have to report anything? Like, we have some wells, I'm sure out in Skyville and perhaps on 665, there should be 2 there.
Typically residential wells, there's no requirement for reporting unless you do individual testing yourselves. There is requirements by NDH to do testing of public facilities and buildings, and they have a predefined schedule that they typically adhere to. So that information is typically limited. They look at things like E. coli and a handful of parameters, so.
Okay. Is it ever possible to request water samples from them? I mean, it's obviously up to the homeowner if they want to do that, but could that request ever be made and run samples on it ourselves or?
It depends on, so when you ask for samples, it depends on what you're testing. Basic sample, it's about $50 the last time I checked. Turn that in, and that would be dependent on the homeowner wanting to do that. But yeah, we can request that if people who have wells around.
And I mean, I understand that's not a full scale image of what we would find as a industrial well, but it would give us maybe some idea of what kind of source we're dealing with.
Yeah, you'll get an initial snapshot of basically the water chemistry and quality. So some of the challenge with groundwater is over time it changes, especially under high demand. So as you start to pull farther out of the aquifer and actually establish that corner depression that occurs, then you start to really see the chemistry changes, so.
Okay, were there any other questions about the proposal? Please, sorry.
Sure.
Go on through, yeah. rate study.
Absolutely. So Becky reached out and mentioned that there were some questions about conducting a rate study. I talked with Brian Golden, who is part of our team and has a lot of experience with funding and assisting with rates. And In our conversation today, I do have some notes here and I'd like to walk you through those. And what I want to qualify too is if you have any further questions and I can't answer them, I'll definitely go back to Brian and have more conversation and we'll come right back and answer those. But the synopsis in conversation about the rate study is with the current position White Lake's in, it's kind of Bolton Wake's opinion that it's likely either option is going to cost approximately the same. And while that's hard to believe, from the get-go, it really depends on the fact that if you look at it in two scenarios and two lights. We have a near term, 20 years, where, the city of White Lake is looking to make major improvements with, say, a large cost where you're gonna have to hit your affordability threshold for a PFA loan. So within that 20 years, what we see here is that we're gonna end up having to maximize affordability threshold, prior to getting additional grants to make improvements on the water treatment systems. After the 20-year loan period, the cheaper option would be the one with the less operating expenses. So the East Range Water Board, it's our opinion that the East Range Water Board would be cheaper since the O&M and repair costs are ultimately shared costs. It comes down to sample size of how many people are paying for the water system. By doubling the system, there will be an economy of scale and therefore will be a reduced O&M cost that has to be shared by the communities. But if we talk about near term right now, and then we can talk about the post 20-year term. So the 20-year snapshot is going to ultimately depend on how the funding plays out. The PFA program provides affordability-based grants to maintain water supply costs at roughly 1.2% of median household income. Once costs exceed that 1.2% median household income, grants basically come into play and cover that gap, that affordability gap. The current MHI, which is median household income of White Lakes, is estimated to be 70,583 based off of census data and other data that's available online. At a maximum affordability of 1.2%, this would equate to roughly $847 per year per equivalent residential user. That's the individual resident who'd be paying or home that'd be paying for this. The available data online provide that there's roughly 851 households in White Lakes. So when you do the math, this means that at max affordability, the city would generate roughly $720,000 in annual revenue from the residential users. Past data has shown that approximately 5% of the water use in White Lakes is commercial or industrial. So using that metric, we can inflate the non-residential portion to roughly $760,000 per year as the max affordability for White Lakes. What this means is that the maximum expenditure for the city would have on water supply is that $760,000, and above that per year, the grants then would kick in. For the specific question in mind, there would be an operating cost for either the East Range Water Board or the well option. These operating costs would include O&M for the distribution system. So to simplify it, if we assume that after either option, if we assume for groundwater or East Range Water Board, there's an O&M cost of roughly $150,000 per water system. This leaves White Lake with $610,000 in available yearly revenue to be used for debt service. So that's the gap that you have to meet in order to hit your affordability threshold before additional grant kicks in. And that's ultimately because White Lakes does not carry a lot of debt on its current water system. So again, to use these grants, you can get that debt affordability level before you can maximize the grant. So assuming an interest rate of roughly 2% and a loan term of 20 years, the cost per $1 million in debt is about $60,000. So we look at your $610,000 available, this means that the affordability threshold is roughly $10 million. That's what we can expect to have to pay up to prior to grants. So what this means is then, like a $12 million project, the cost to the city is going to have to be $10 million, and then above that, you can get grant for like $2 million. And a $50 million project will also cost the city $10 million. So there's a level here that once you hit that $10 million, it's kind of irregardless of what the project cost is, it's going to be covered by a grant through PFA. Now, with this in mind, there's a couple scenarios we want to run through. An option of being under 10 million, and then there's an option of looking at it above 22 million, which I'll get into here in a second. If the project costs less than 10 million, which would only occur in the groundwater the groundwater option, is if a water treatment plant is not required. If it's just wells, it's likely that the project would be under 10 million. But that's extremely unlikely, just knowing the region's general groundwater and what we're seeing across the state of the groundwater systems, there's likely gonna be treatment required. If the grant needs to be so if the grant needs exceed the maximum grant available, then you could pay more than 10 million in debt. Currently, the max affordability grant is 5 million, and what this means is, so once you meet your grant affordability threshold, the current state statute is that they will cover 5 million in grant. There's legislation that is currently being pursued that will extend that from 5 million to 12 million. So what this means for Hoyt Lakes is by the time a project is selected, you would be able to spend up to 22 million before you're on the back end of the grant and you have to have additional costs. So that would be your range, 10 million to 22 million. And again, these numbers are rough estimates, mind you.
That's if that passes, or it doesn't pass.
That's if it's passed, then it's 15 million. So the bottom line is either project is, so the other scenario we want to play is if either project goes above the 22 million cap that we're estimating once the legislation passes. You'd have to find additional funding to obviously meet that funding gap from 22 million to whatever the project cost is. In discussions with local representatives, agencies such as David Lilgard and MPC, they provided in recent discussions that, if you're looking for funding, where do you go to? Well, you go to direct appropriations. And in many cases, a joint venture has proven to be more successful in finding funding than simply a project on its own. And what that means is that in the eyes of the legislator, the regionalization would be more preferable opposed to the city of Hoyt Lakes pursuing its own water treatment plant or water system improvements. So the bottom line is there's some play with the money there and how it handles, but ultimately under 20 years, you would be looking at maximizing your affordability for the next 20 some years, which does not change your rates ultimately to pay off the loan. So now considering the post 20 years, when the loan's paid off, and now we're looking at strictly O&M costs to drive the factor. So as mentioned, after the 20-year program, the cheaper option is East Range Water Board system from a qualitative standpoint. And I want to say this a couple of times because in doing this desktop analysis and having some conversation, it's difficult at this time to provide a quantitative number on what a rate can be based on multiple factors. We're talking about 20 years of the loan having Hoyt Lakes moving through 20-year period to pay off the loan of where it's based off PFA and grant affordability. And after that point, it's going to depend on O&M costs, your median household income, which can change significantly in 20 years. And depending on economic development, things like new range. If we have a new group of individuals coming in, the blue collar worker, increasing that median household income versus if Hoyt Lakes continues trending towards more retirees, lowering the median household income. That really changes what your rate structure could look in a forecasted 20 years. So again, it's kind of hard to quantitatively say it's going to be $70.60 or whatever it might be respectively. So we use a qualitative analysis here to talk about relations with the East Range Water Board versus the groundwater option. So if we talk about O&M costs for the East Range Water Board versus groundwater, ultimately the source water quality treatment costs need to be considered. When you look at Embarrass Pit, which is you'd be getting water from the East Range Water Board, and we talk about groundwater, we have an interesting situation where ultimately the Embarrass Pit is fed from a groundwater source. And so we're anticipating water quality to be very similar. But we also know that the Embarrass Pit water quality as there is a project that's right in Aurora going on. And from the early analysis, it's showing that that's going to be fairly economical to treat and require little treatment. And that's specifically because the Embarrass Pit receives the bulk of its input from groundwater and transient flow through the alluvial sand vein that's adjacent to the Mine Lake and Embarrass River. One comment I want to provide here too is in order to understand what water quality treatment levels needed for groundwater, ultimately we need to move through the assessment phases of the proposal and understand what the water quality is going to be, determining again that level of chemical additive that's needed. So again, it's hard to put a number specifically on the groundwater system, but we recognize that as they're both groundwater fed, there's probably a very similar cost that's going to be there. So it comes down to O&M cost comparison. And ultimately, if we look at this from a high level again, the option of joining the East Range Water Board will likely have lower O&M costs. And again, it's kind of economy of scale. You're doubling the amount of residents and users that are purchasing water. And so those O&M costs are gonna be divided, amongst all those users. And so if we kind of look at employee costs alone, the benefits, and, you could be seeing where with shared employee, reduction in employee as an opportunity, that you're gonna be having less employee costs, less benefit costs. And specifically from a maintenance perspective, it's typical to see for one facility of $4 million in 20 years in rehab costs. Well, so what that breaks down for Hoyt Lakes is that's roughly $200,000 a year on average, again, for a 20-year, $4 million cost. If you're doubling your service area, including other communities, you're effectively reducing that by 50%. So you go from having a $200,000 K a year average to potentially $100,000 in shared costs. Lastly, the groundwater treatment system will have O&M costs when you compare it to the current water treatment due to reduced complexity. And what I mean by that is, for where you guys are at today with your high cost for treatment, we know it's gonna go down. But again, when you compare that to the level of water quality in the East Range Water Board has the Embarrass Pit, we're anticipating it to be very similar. So the synopsis for this, in long-winded explanation I provided you, is in the near term, they're gonna be roughly the same. Post 20 years, it comes down to O&M costs. And again, without understanding the groundwater quality that's available, it's a little bit difficult to provide a quantitative analysis. But ultimately, from a high level, we can say from a qualitative standpoint that looking at the two systems, looking at the two options is definitely assumed that the East Range Water Board option is going to provide lower O&M costs through the purchase of the water versus handling it and fabricating and making it yourselves. So ultimately, in talking with Brian, he's recommending that we don't necessarily proceed with a rate study. Understanding that it's not gonna provide a lot of tangible information, especially with the amount of estimating and assumptions that are gonna have to be taken into it. If you guys would like to proceed with it, we're more than happy to, but we just feel that it's just not gonna provide a valuable tool at this time.
Based on the information provided, back in the napkin calculation, is our current rate is $62 a month. The guesstimated increase to cover up to that $10 million would be $70 a month. And so rates, as they stand today, would have to go up $8 a month to get us to that affordability.
And then the following that we recommend is, once you maximize your affordability, start looking at water main projects within the city, because those are gonna be almost 100% grant eligible. Now, there is some cost to that, and that's why I say almost 100%, and that depends on the application with the PFA. But it's a mechanism that you can use while you're paying off your debt service, that you're making critical improvements that would ultimately impact the city of Hoyt Lakes either way, and show up in your rates.
So, back, napkin math, our current is $62 a month for just the water,
It will be in 25 if it passes. Yes.
25. To meet the requirement of threshold, and
It'd have to be above $70.
1.2% of your median household income.
so we're looking at guaranteed increasing our water bill despite it costing less to treat the water.
Yes.
Because we've put in all the infrastructure to pay for all that. After 20 years, it drops, potentially.
But I would put a very strong potential on there, all costs will increase in 20 years, yes.
And does this have to increase, with income, median income? So if our income all of a sudden jumps to $100,000 a year, then our rate has to go up after that.
Correct. It's dependent on the median household income. Yeah,
But if it drops,
correct. Then your affordability threshold drops, you get more grant to cover the gaps.
even after the fact. So like we're 5 years in and our income goes down, we can lower our rate and then the grant just covers what's the difference, or?
That's a good question. I will check into that one. That one I don't know.
I will say for the wastewater plant, we were required to sign an agreement stating that our rate would increase X number, for the next however many years.
For the duration of.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, 2%.
Yeah, whatever it is, yeah. So we were required under that agreement. It could have changed since then, but we did have to spend that.
So I, basically, either way we go, it's a guarantee we're not gonna reduce our water costs. For the residents, they still pay.
Correct, for the next 20 years, specifically on the infrastructure needs and wetlands, yeah.
And have the water change.
I don't know about anybody else, but I've had quite a few people talk to me and ask me if we're gonna support the new water system. And virtually everybody that I talked to, I said, you realize your chances are that your water bills could go up. They said, yeah, well, it'd be worth it to get off of the system we're on now. And understanding that, yeah, I mean, Jake was kind enough to take me to the plant the other day. And, because I had asked him for the tour, and looking at the water coming into the lake, and I've been on the lake fishing, I've been in the lake swimming. And everybody knows it's not good. Not only that, the cost for the chemicals and the treatment that he's gotta put into it. It seems that most people want better water in town. And to think of even considering the wells is kind of a pig in the poke. Really, compared to having the availability of the East Range Water Board supply right there. And it will provide better water to the city. And to think of, well, we're gonna save a few bucks by continuing to treat this and provide this quality water to people. I think that's actually unfathomable. That'd be my opinion on it.
Jake, can you speak to any of the recent developments that have been changing where you're adding chemicals and potentially reducing cost of chemicals?
We're trying like heck to reduce the costs. Right now, we're talking about getting main chemical that'll settle faster, as Dave saw when he was there. We're still getting a lot of block coming up, going over the weirs and going in for filters. But, you know, we're looking at getting new tanks in after, February 1st. I believe the new tanks you guys approved are coming in, that should drop the current cost for the current chemical we're feeding quite a bit. And all I can say is we're trying. Kelly's working his butt off, Josh will attest to it, and they're with them.
Did you want additional time to provide me with any questions you have for Bill and me, and I can get those to them, and then you can consider this at the next meeting? Would you want to approve or reject it now?
You guys had your preliminary meeting, did you get any responses to the questions that were sent in?
The primary response I received from both the township and Aurora was that they're more than happy to do anything that they can to get us to join the system, short of paying bills for us. They're really interested in working together. Obviously, you know, Luke put the Highway 110 project together to upsize the pipe, and, you know, they're doing all the work that they can to make sure that it's as seamless as possible for us to join. A lot of the specific questions I received, they don't have answers to, makeup of board, cost sharing, you know, the cost sharing will be set forth by the engineers based on percentage of usage, but what does that mean for the board? What does that mean for anything like that? They're willing to work through that process with us and make sure that everyone's comfortable with it.
I was at the meeting, they had a public meeting a year or two ago. I went there and asked a lot of questions about it. And they told me, basically what you've already said, that they would be more than glad to upsize the size of the main all the way to the holiday. So that the only thing the city of White Lakes have to be concerned with is the line from here to there.
And there's a lot of discussion about where does the ownership cut off, because there's residents of the township between the Aurora property, you know, Aurora boundaries and White Lakes boundaries who are interested in joining. So is that township infrastructure, is it split township, White Lakes, you know, what that all looks like, are all,
And again, how does what's the manpower look like? Is it its own water board employees, or is it contracted somehow through one of the cities or joint?
It seems like preliminarily they're interested in everyone having their own employees and then the city entity who works the facility charging them the water board to run the plant, and it would allow for additional weekends off. As opposed to now we're in every other weekend, you know, when you're have Wabash or have Aurora and the township who potentially have licensed employees, you're then splitting that between 5 employees instead of 2.
So Aurora would run it and then charge back, or
It would be all entities who have licensed employees.
so it'd be kind of a rotating shift, Wabash provides this week and Aurora provides next week.
They also said that the makeup of the board would change with Twin Lakes representatives on it also.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't just be something writing a check out.
Yeah, and that was a question that was probably one of the first asked is, are we interested in just being a customer, you know, buying a bulk product for them, or are we interested in being a partner? And based on the conversations I've had here, I was pretty adamant that this council was interested in being a partner in the facility, not just buying bulk.
And with the breakdowns of water usage, White Lakes makes up about 50% if you were to put them all together.
Yeah, approaching 50%, yeah.
So I mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that fall into the cost of the facility and infrastructure as well?
So the way the agreement is put together too is there is jurisdictions for each community that's in the agreement. There's shared infrastructure and then there's jurisdictional infrastructure, which each city would be required of. And the agreement will list it out, so as what Becky was kind of alluding to too, is there'll be a piece here where, upon entry, you would not negotiate, but you would discuss which infrastructure is jurisdictional, which infrastructure is gonna be shared. And then the East Range Water Board would pay their costs, and then White Lakes would still be responsible for their jurisdictional costs. That could be like discussion on where the pipeline comes from, where does it end in Aurora to where it comes in White Lakes, and those sorts of components.
So potentially it could look like joint cost being the facility itself, the water main going to Aurora, the water main going through Aurora, and the water main going to White Lakes, all being responsible for White Lakes.
That will just be discussed with the East Range Water Board again.
Yeah, if you think about the jurisdictions in terms of the township and Aurora, like the township doesn't have a water tower, but they need a water
Correct.
tower. And so those types of conversations, that's why the agreement was set up the way it is. White Lakes is a little different because we have our own water system, and so it would just be the pieces of connection as well as the shared parts of the infrastructure for this facility.
Specifically in the plant itself.
Yeah.
And the raw water intake.
Yeah.
I know in earlier discussions, you know, we identified the 2, the wells and the connection with Aurora, but it sounds like, I mean, from what Dave, what you mentioned, you're in favor of just sticking with the one option of joining.
I would, if it required it, I would make a motion to do so, because I don't believe that putting all the money into test wells and everything else, when you look at the costs, and they're only talking basically 6-inch wells, whereas a municipal well is gonna be 24 to 36 inches. And you look at the water in some of the municipalities around here that do have wells, that's dealing with some of the same stuff we've got in lake water, the tannins and manganese. Well, tannins are in open water, but the water is pretty poor quality in some of the municipalities on the range that are stuck on all water. And I mean, this is a sure shot. And as he said, the quality of the water in the lake is much better than what we've got coming into our kitchen faucets.
But you did say it's roughly similar to the groundwater you find.
And again, it's best case similar, obviously into the evaluation. To further kind of expand too on timeline here is we did talk about timeline during the meeting, and just to kind of understand some major milestones, just to provide so the council can have further discussion if it wants, but ultimately in looking at the timeline, so the critical piece here is the 110 improvements and to Aurora. If there's a decision to be made on upsizing some of the pipe to allow for that connection from Aurora's public water system to Twin Lakes. That project is slated for September of next year. And so in discussion, we recognize that if the council can decide which avenue it wants to proceed with, specifically by spring and into summer, that's roughly the timeline that we're looking at right now. What's being happened through Aurora is that it's just being planned to make those improvement upgrades, to do the work as Becky's been talking about. Because ultimately, it's just a contract deduct on our part since we are working with the county and Aurora. So ultimately, it was decided late in the game not to do that, we could just take it out. So there is some protection in the schedule here, but if a decision could be slated by next spring, early summer, then that would be the best.
How much of the town of White is going to go on with the new system?
12% of the current Aurora Township split is the township. You're looking at Pineville, Scenic Acres, and then the south.
Because they had mentioned at that meeting that they were hoping to extend it farther
Yeah.
into town of White
Okay.
in addition to what's.
Yep, and then if there's a line run from Aurora to Hoyt, there's entities or properties off of that roadway that would be interested in joining. That are in the township.
Correct, and like Vic said, so the connection was just established, to Pineville and to Scenic Acres, so those communities will be brought on, fairly soon, actually, so. But there was nothing south on the town of White, south of Aurora, there's no expansion, in that area,
Nothing planned or current.
nothing's planned,
Okay.
so.
I did hear a motion from Dave to move forward with joining the East Range Water Board and appointing Jake and I to that committee.
I guess my largest concerns from, as a resident and as a representative from White Lakes, that we get representation on the board, in conjunction with the amount that we use, so we have equal say in what it looks like moving forward. As far as setting costs and things like that, we should have a say in that if we're making up half of the East Range Water Board usage at least. Same with cost, I don't necessarily want White Lakes to pay for everyone else's water. If we're paying for half the facility, then again, we should have half representation and things like that. And the same goes with the employment. I'd hate to see us lose employees and they get to keep theirs. Those are my concerns.
Mayor, if I could just interject to one thing, as I'm winding down in the next month, my 30-year career as a municipal lawyer. The one thing that has struck me over the last 2 years, as I've gone around, I represent numerous cities, and the costs of doing business have increased so significantly. And it just driven by the labor market, because the labor market has changed so much in the last 2 years, and just the costs of doing business, not only with the labor market, that's a big driver, but a lot of other things too. Regionalization is, it's a reality of a place like Iron Range, where, you have all these small communities that are, standalone, but they are in, relatively close geographic proximity to other communities, and the logistics can work out. Just the concept of regionalization on so much of what you do, whether it's with something like this or with public safety, or parks and rec, youth programs. It's a reality, because at some point, for a lot of these small cities, standing alone and doing it on your own is, from a cost standpoint, is not gonna be sustainable. It's just not. You can only increase the levy, and you have to, you have to increase the levy to do business, but at some point, you reach a breaking point where you can't increase the levy anymore, and the amount of funds that you get in from state or other outside sources is not enough to backfill that. So I think, it's a reality of what you're gonna be facing over the next many years, is exactly what the motion is here, and that is to join the Joint Waters Board and see if you can be a part of the project. So I just wanted to interject that.
And I'm not opposed to regionalization, it's looking back in history, we got the schools, for example. White Lakes had multiple schools, went down to one, Wapak had their school, Aurora had multiple schools. We had to join for financial reasons, and 20 years after that, then what are we left with? We have the rundown school, Wapak lost their school, we have the school in Aurora. You look at the Catholic churches. Financially, they had to join, now we're looking at Wapak lost their church and White Lakes is losing their church. I don't want White Lakes to lose another thing and just be an afterthought, so.
Yeah, I think one of the priorities will be, you know, the funding and the costs, but also to protect our interests as in for White Lakes and not have everything, you know, end up being Aurora's employees, or, you know, we still keep the shared services with Town of White Lakes and Aurora.
Yeah, I guess on my end, like, a lot like Dave just talking about, I think community, they're pro, more, a better quality of water, you know, East Range Water Board. But I think before we make any big steps, we get a lot of our questions answered that. And then getting that community input, I'm like, well, this is what it'll cost, this is how much rates will go up if we hook in with Aurora. So that's kind of crystal clear to the public, like, yes, we want better quality of water, seemingly better quality of water, hooking up with Aurora, but this is what it will cost. So I just want to make sure the public's informed. It has an impact with learning, so the big decisions are made.
And, with appointing me and Jake to meet with them, we'll work through a lot of those questions. Obviously, some of it will take a formal joint powers agreement, but we'll try to nail down some answers to those questions. I do know that we were on a time crunch for the last meeting, and so we did spend, we spent an hour together kind of talking about the big scope, and so we can definitely work on getting into the more specific questions moving forward.
All right, are we moving forward then, if Dave has a motion to move forward with these meetings and getting some preliminary costs?
So this is just to like meet with them and get questions answered, not that we're absolutely going to come in and get right to steps.
Yeah.
Just to get it right.
Yeah, just to meet with them, get some specifics ironed out. We won't have answers to all the questions you have,
Sure.
which is part of, the unknown of going forward with the project, but we'll get answers to as many as we can.
And then two, with not going ahead with looking at the wells in town, that's saving money to do all those tests on. I think the most likely thing we're gonna do is put up these many lots, right? So a lot of money, but they do these tests. Think I can.
Is that a second?
I'll second.
No, there's been a motion and a second, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried, we'll continue the discussions of more concrete answers to provide to the public. On from there.
Very good.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, 11.2, pay request number 2 from Max Grade Construction in the amount of $117,181.58, and that is for the White Lakes Wellness Center. First time. Here's the second invoice you have on this budget. Is there any questions or I need a motion to?
Is this for the back building they're making or?
Yep, so it's for the entire arena project. It includes quite a few updates, including the parking lot and concrete in front of the building. Building a back building for the ice plant, lighting improvements, ADA improvements, including bleachers, new doors, and wheelchairs.
So this is for the project.
Yep.
I'll make a motion to do that.
I'll support.
Motion and support, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. 11.3, resolution for America in Bloom Grant Program.
Okay, so it was a tight timeline, so I'm gonna ask you to both approve the application and also the grant agreement. Kenny and I sat down and worked through the America in Bloom grant together. This provides trees, shrubs, and flowers to communities with a CN railway in them. And so, we were awarded a $25,000 one-to-one match for the Midway beautification, which is something we talked about when we were doing that project. We anticipate planting 20 maple trees, 20 oak trees, and 15 white pines. The maple and oak trees are $200 a piece, and the white pines are $1,000 a piece.
How
So,
big are they?
6 feet.
So they're.
Yeah. In addition, $2,000 will be spent on shrubs and flowers, and these are estimates, and the total of that would be $25,000, which is reimbursable by the grant. We were also able to utilize in-kind services and professional services as matching dollars. And so I did engage with the Ranger ATV Club and the Garden Club, and both entities are willing to help us with in-kind services, planting trees, flowers, and shrubs in the area. And so I anticipate the out-of-pocket cost to the city will be about $6,500 for topsoil, mulch, signage, and then you do have to pay $1,500 as a membership of American in Bloom, but you can use that for matching dollars as well.
Is that a one-time payment or?
Yes.
monthly?
No, one time. And that's the lowest, and we're one of the smallest communities. It goes up based on population. So the, number 3 here is approving the application, and then number 4 will be approving the grant.
So the total project cost is $55,000. We're going to get $25,000 back on the grant and still have to cough up $30,000.
A majority of that will be in-kind services, so it'll be no out-of-pocket expense to the city. It'll be labor costs for Public Works, Ranger ATV, and the Garden Club.
You said the out-of-pocket expense would be $6,500.
Yes.
So total project $55,000, we only pay $6,500.
Do you want a separate motion for each of the grant one?
Is this just for the Midway area, or is it supposed to go down into the beach area as well, or?
It is, it's for the, that entire parcel of property.
all the way
From the
beach?
lake all the way up to the,
Yep.
you know, in that whole area over there.
I should also mention, I did also look into, butterfly garden type grants. They don't have any funding in this funding cycle. And there's one that the city would be eligible for, but it's primarily for like butterfly highway type things. And so the city would get money to provide flowers for the butterfly highway, but we also provide grants to residents, so they can have stocking spots for the butterflies too. But like I said, they don't have any funding in this funding cycle.
Yeah, I think it's there's $55,000 worth of improvements to only have to pay 65 seems, seems like a pretty good deal. I will make a motion to approve the resolution to apply for the grant. I'll support. There's been a motion and support. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. And approving the resolution means we have to approve the grant agreement. Is there a motion to approve the actual grant agreement for this?
I'll make that motion.
Motion, is there a second?
Support.
Motion and support, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion is carried. 11.5 ordinance number 246, the 2025 fee schedule. The fee schedule has been posted for no less than 10 days as required, and if you approve it tonight, it will go into effect on 1/1/2025. Right, did anyone have any, I know we've talked about it a couple of times, is there any other questions or comments before it gets approved? Hearing none, we'll need a motion to accept the new fee schedule.
I'll make that motion.
Motion, is there support?
Support.
Motion and support, all those in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Motion carried, and what color are our books this year? They're going to be orange, the orange books, so we have put referred to as the green book, no, it'll be the orange book for 2025. 11.6, St. Louis County Cooperative Agreement for County State Aid Highway 110.
So this is the agreement for the project for Kennedy Memorial that will be going through town next year. Essentially, it's the agreement between the two parties. Usually if there's something we're gonna pay for, it's spelled out in here. There isn't, and so the only thing that burdens the city on this agreement is the requirement that once the county installs the lighting for the street, the city will then take ownership of the lighting and maintenance of that lighting moving forward.
That's in the.
That would be.
Which is what we do now, we maintain the streetlights.
No, but it's sort of
How the power does, but now
Yes.
they go into our maintenance.
The metal ones, Minnesota Power is no longer maintaining, but if you push them really hard, they will, but they're gonna stop maintaining them. They will only maintain lights on wooden poles from now on. So if we keep these metal, the city's gonna end up with them one pair.
Are there any assurances or things like that we can do to make sure this is done by water firewall?
Whether the county and the arena, constructors, Max Gray, are all very aware about Water Carnival and that it's gonna be a very, very busy time. They have all assured us that roadways will be passable and the arena lot.
They're gonna do the whole stretch all at once or block by block or what?
I don't know what their construction plan is. They did say they're gonna use the back road through the arena lot as the pass through for town. They talked about doing flagging, so one lane at a time. But remember, we're also hoping to have Westover completely torn up at that time as well. So, for the city's FEMA project. So it'll be a busy construction year.
Maybe the water carnival committee can give Max Gray workers some incentive to have it done, maybe get some free wristbands if they complete it for us or something. Yeah, it is a straightforward agreement, there's no cost to us spelled out in here, so is there a motion to approve the agreement with St. Louis County?
I'll make that motion.
Motion, and I'll support that, keep that done. All those in favor? Aye. None opposed? Motion carried. Brings us to number 12, adjournment.
Make that motion.
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
None opposed?